This is video 9 of the Effective Child Protection course for child protection practitioners. Section 5 continues to develop the measure element of effective child protection. Section 5 provides a detailed explanation of the use of the Steps to Change tool. Steps to Change is a structured approach to working on changes related to significant harm. These steps map out the journey towards good enough care in the areas of change. It is progressive. Good enough care has been outlined in the Child Protection Conference, and the evidence of care that the family should be working towards has been clearly verbalized. Steps to Change describes the progress between Step 2 and Step 8. For each of these individual steps, the family will be involved in the description of the situation, circumstances, or behaviours that will demonstrate that they have reached this goal. The case conference has already outlined the areas of change. What indicates the score of 2, that care is not good enough. It has also visualised what will be achieved if care is good enough, a score of 8. Steps to Change fills in steps 3 to 7. The Steps to Change tool creates the focus for conversations about change. As each step towards progress on change is discussed, the family is engaged in talking about and visualizing those changes. Each step describes small, achievable, and gradual progress towards sustainable change. These discussions with the family amplify the change talk that is necessary to create the best circumstances to promote change. We know from research that the more discussion there is about change, the more likelihood there is that change will be achieved. The skills of practitioners in collaborative communication or motivational interviewing provides the foundation for better conversations to keep children safe. The following instructions will explain the use of the Steps to Change tool. It will explain what each step represents to help you think about its contents. We'll also look at examples to show the gradual progression. We will also suggest that you follow a certain order in building the steps. We'll look at how to do this. We suggest you follow a specific sequence to build the steps. The reason for this is that if we move progressively, for example 3, then 4, then 5, we find that workers find it difficult to build a progressive sequence. We find the gaps are irregular, or that by 5 you have achieved the change you were working towards. So we suggest the sequence as follows. We already have the values for 2 and 8 outlined in the case conference. First, we describe 3, the very first green shoots of growth. That first change in behaviour, thinking, or actions that show change has started. Then we define 7. We're nearly there. Think of it as being close to 8, but there is something fundamental that is not yet quite proved. Quite often we find that the change described in 7 has been demonstrated, but the change hasn't been tested yet, or had enough time to show that the individuals are applying the change consistently. Then we look at 5, which is midway between 3 and 7, then 4, then 6. We'll explain these in greater detail. How should you do this practically? The steps to change tool should be used to prepare beforehand and map the journey from 2 to 8. If you imagine any journey, think of using a route planner for a car journey. You will be clear of your starting position and your destination. For example, if we wanted to travel from Bangor to Wrexham, we wouldn't just plan to get to Llandudno and then decide where we needed to go next. In effective child protection, we use steps to change to plan all stages of the journey. We do this in advance. This may, of course, take several conversations with the family, and whilst you are working on the steps, some change may already be taking place. However, we suggest that you plan the whole journey. There are 2 things to avoid. Don't just plan one step at a time. And don't just write the steps to change as a record of what the person has already done. These are 2 things we've seen practitioners doing. Instead of preparing and using the steps to change as a planning tool, they discuss only the next step with the family. Then, once that has been achieved, they think, what next? We use the analogy of a car journey between Bangor and Wrexham. You wouldn't just plan to go to Llandudno and then decide where you'd go next. This is not how steps to change has been designed to work. It was created to be a planning tool. And the other thing we've seen is people using the steps to change only as a way of recording progress. What we mean is only using it to write what the family has achieved. They change their behaviour or try things out, and the worker records this as a step that's been accomplished. We accept this provides a working tool that provides a very transparent record of achievements. It does not, however, create a planning tool to map out people's goals. To use the car journey analogy, it's like taking a journey, and wherever you arrive, you record it and celebrate what went well. You start in Bangor and arrive anywhere because you hadn't decided where you were aiming for. So you're relieved you got there safely and write this as a journal. So remember, this is a planning tool to be used in advance to map all the steps with the family. In this section, we'll explain the sequence we recommend for developing steps to change. This will be introduced first, and then we'll explain each step in detail as an illustrative case example. The case conference has outlined the evidence why care is not good enough and scored as 2. The statement of the evidence that would indicate that care was good enough is scored at 8. We therefore already have the description of our narrative for the scores of 2 and 8. First, we develop step 3. This is the very first indicator that something is changing, the first green shoots of spring. We suggest that it is easier to start from where we are at the beginning of intervention. The facts are known. The need to protect the child has been established. The first step is what is necessary to demonstrate that there is some change. It's the very beginning of the journey. This will, of course, be different in every case. It can be as basic as the willingness to start to discuss matters that have previously been minimised or avoided. Or it could be an initial shift in behaviour. Secondly, we develop step 7. We already know how step 8 is described. We can take this agreed statement of what will be good enough and step back. We're not quite there yet. There is still a fundamental issue around the likelihood of significant harm. It'll often be a situation where there has been great progress and many of the new behaviours are established, but the circumstances would not result in taking the child's name off a child protection register. One scenario could be that the changes have been made but have not been proven or tested enough through such situations that will face the family. It remains uncertain whether the change is well enough embedded to reduce the likelihood of significant harm in the future. Next, we look at step 5. This is the midway point between 3 and 7. The progress at step 5 will bridge the gap between 3 and 7. By step 5, there should be good progress in addressing the change. The sequence has built its main pillars. We already have 2 and 8. These make it straightforward to identify 3 and 7. Step 5 is visualized between 3 and 7. From this point onward, the development of steps 4 and step 6 are interim progresses between 3 and 5 and between 5 and 7. We look at each of these steps with an illustrative case example. Step 2 is defined in the case conference. This will be the circumstances or behaviour linked to the risk of significant harm. If we look at the case example that has been discussed in previous videos, we introduced this case example in video 6, where we looked at working with the what needs to change grid. The change here was: Mum and Dad need to ensure that they are managing their behaviour and ensuring that the children are not exposed to aggressive arguments and physical violence, as this has left the children feeling scared in the past. The evidence that care was not good enough was defined in the social work report at case conference as: police reports confirm that the children have seen and heard heated and aggressive arguments between Mum and Dad. The children have seen Dad hit Mum on one occasion known to social services, as a family member has witnessed it. The children have stated to workers that they are scared at times living at home. These have been brought together to this statement: the children have seen and heard aggressive arguments and physical violence between Mum and Dad. The children have reported that they feel scared at times. Step 8 was also defined in the case conference. This was the visualization of good enough care, where the risk of significant harm was no longer present in that area of concern. The evidence about what would indicate that care was good enough was defined in the social work reports to case conference as: Mum and Dad ensure that no violence or arguments occur between them. Mum and Dad find ways of managing diffusing the situation if they become angry or arguments may start. Children report feeling safer at home. These have been brought together in this statement: Mum and Dad ensure that the children do not witness any arguments or physical violence between them, and that the children are not aware of any violent incidents at home. No reports received regarding arguments, violence between Mum and Dad over a significant period of time. Children confirm this and report feeling safer at home. The initial step that is developed in the steps to change is step 3. This is the very first indication of change, indication of engagement, that first green shoot of change. This can be very tentative. It may only be symbolic. It may be limited to a family's willingness to start to talk about issues of concern where they have previously been ignored. It may only be compliance with tasks or actions that have been agreed. In the case example, we see this described as accepting what has taken place, accepting that the children have been affected, talking about their behaviour and the impact on the children. This is written as: Mum and Dad accept that arguments and physical incidents have been taking place at home and that the children have witnessed these and are affected by them. They are starting to talk openly about their behaviour and its impact on the children. In the example, this is a description of the minimum starting position. The parents have to engage in discussion about their behaviour and the impact this is having on their children. In this case, this is described as first signs, and parents will know that conversations have to begin. These expectations are low, but it creates the foundation for all subsequent work. Next, we develop step 7. We are already aware of what we're working towards to ensure that care is good enough. Step 8 is already defined. So we can take this agreed statement of what will be good enough and step back. We are not there yet. There is still a fundamental issue about the likelihood of significant harm. It will often be a situation where there has been great progress and many new behaviours are established, but the circumstances would not result in taking the child's name off the Child Protection Register. One scenario could be that the changes have been made, but have not been proved or tested enough through situations that the family will face. It remains uncertain whether the change is well enough embedded to reduce the likelihood of significant harm in the future. In the case, we see this described as parents understand the impact their behaviour has on the children, parents trying to manage their behaviour, no reported incidents, it's early days, things are going well but haven't yet been tested or proven. You will notice the focus on the experience of the children in this statement. This is written as: Mum and Dad understand the impact of the arguments and physical incidents on the children and have been working on managing their behaviour. The children are not reporting incidents are happening, but they continue to be afraid that they will. It's early days in terms of using the new ways of coping, but these are in place. Their ability to protect the children from seeing and hearing the arguing and fighting is untested. In the example, this is a description of good progress, but not quite there yet, as the changes and new behaviours have not yet been tested. In many change situations, until people's new coping strategies have been tested, it is unknown whether people will be able to draw on these new tactics and show how they are capable of demonstrating this consistently. There is no fixed guidance on how long practitioners should hold a watching brief to check that change is embedded. Generally, situations break down in the first few months as things are not yet embedded or well enough developed. You should at least monitor the situations where the parent's change has been tested. If there are lapses or relapses, it is important to learn from these in order to improve resilience. New behaviours have to be tested in order to assure practitioners that real change has taken place. Next, we develop step 5. We have established the main bookends. We have defined where we are moving from in step 2 and 3 and our destination in steps 7 and 8. Step 5 is best described as the midpoint, halfway towards the change outcome. It will show good progress and travel, but there remains much to do. The behaviour should be notable, something definitive to aim for by this step. In the case example, we see this described as parents taking steps to stop arguing and try out new behaviour, parents demonstrating that they have acknowledged the impact of the behaviour, parents understand the consequence of the behaviour for their family. This is written as: Mum and Dad are actively trying to stop arguments and testing out new ways of coping with their arguments based on advice received. They acknowledge the effect of arguments and physical violence on the children and the consequences of this for the family. In the example, this is a description of notable progress. We should be seeing parents doing things differently, but also that they are thinking differently. They accept the impact of their behaviour and they understand the consequences for the family if this continues. These are positive factors to promote change by changing the way parents think about their circumstances. Steps 4 and step 6 are very similar in the way that they are developed. For step 4, we look at the behaviours in step 3 and step 5 and search out what progresses the change between these two steps, what links them. In the case example, we see this described as parents working with domestic violence workers, parents addressing what happens between them, parents to look at tactics to de-escalate, parents have techniques to put into action. This is written as Mum and Dad have begun working with the domestic violence workers to understand what happens between them and find ways to de-escalate. They have techniques to test out. In the example, step 3 is about accepting that these situations happen and to start talking about them. Step 5 is trying to change behaviour based on advice received. The features of step 4 is very much an interim development. It maintains progress. There is an external intervention with the aim to develop the parent's awareness and to have alternative responses to experiment with in the future steps. For step 6, we look at the behaviours in step 5 and step 7 and search out what progresses the change between these two steps, what links them. In the case example, we see this described as parents can recognise risky situations for them. Parents have strategies to put into action. And this is written as Mum and Dad can show that they are able to recognise where situations may escalate, and they have strategies to manage their behaviour and diffuse the situation if arguments begin. In the example, step 5 is trying to change behaviour based on advice received, and step 7 is a behaviour change matched to a change in attitude and thinking. The features of step 6 is very much an interim development. It maintains progress. The parents have awareness and strategies to apply to difficult situations. They are demonstrating that they can put these into action. If we reintroduce the steps table with the case example, it gives an illustration of how the steps to change may look in practice. We are reminded that step 2 and step 8 are already defined in the case conference. Practically, we would not expect the steps to change to be developed in one meeting. It cannot be developed without a conversation about change. These collaborative conversations about change are the key to creating the environments for sustained change. Whilst the steps to change tool structures the recording of progress, it is secondary to the conversation that takes place with families. Over time, some of the words may be revised. We should aim to use the parents' words as much as possible. This becomes possible over time, but will be difficult at the beginning of the work. Steps to change is a planning tool. It is important to use it to map the whole journey. The steps should be written in the early stages of intervention so that the journey is understood by the family. Seeing progress and knowing where they stand are some of the responses we've received from families to using the steps to change tool. The steps need to reflect the impact on children. Steps should also blend goals which demonstrate that people are thinking differently, as much as goals that capture people doing things differently. we suggest you follow a specific sequence to build the steps. The reason for this is that if we move progressively, for example 3, then 4, then 5, we find that workers find it difficult to build a progressive sequence. We find that the gaps are irregular, or that by 5 you have achieved the change you were working towards. The sequence is Step 3, first shoots, Step 7, nearly there, then Step 5, halfway point, then Step 4 and Step 6 as interim steps. Steps to change is a tool, but filling it in should never be thought of as more important than the conversations it encourages. The more people talk about the changes they need to make, the more likely it is that they will make those changes. So conversations about change, or change talk, should be encouraged and amplified. Steps to change should be a collaborative process. At the beginning of intervention, this may be challenging, but practitioners should actively think about how they engage and include parents. We should be ambitious to be seeing the parents' words being used, parents telling us they know what they have to do, parents telling us they know how they are doing. Reflect on the information in this section. Having considered how the steps to change works, think about some of these ideas. Conversations drive change. Do you think that using the steps to change tool will help you do this, or will it get in the way? Negotiating and agreeing the steps with the family, how do you think you'll manage the need to safeguard and ensure safety of the child with this negotiation? Do you think it'll be easy to let go of your duty to investigate and assess threshold over time and build a relationship with the parents? How do you think you'll do this? Do you think you can keep focus on the actual experience of the child in the home day to day? Parental problems can often dominate their conversations with practitioners. So think about how you can keep that focus on the child. And finally, was there anything surprising in the sections on steps to change? What did you find interesting, and why? Once you have completed Section 5 of the Effective Child Protection course, please progress to the next part, which is Video 10, Exercise 5, which develops the steps to change for the case example you have been developing.